Hello, everyone. Welcome to Dill Pickling Tips and Tricks. I'm Leanne. I'm the events programmer for the AC Hub, and we are joined today by Sara of Top Shelf Preserves. AC is always connected. Tune in to our live virtual events like this one to help support local businesses and stay connected with the AC community. Before we get started, we're going to share a couple of housekeeping items. We ask that you please keep your microphone muted during the presentation. However, we encourage you to keep your camera on for some face-to-face time. Along the bottom of the screen, you will find a chat button. Feel free to use this feature to introduce yourself and to connect with your college community. Throughout Sara's presentation, we welcome you to type your dill pickling questions in the chat, and I will read them out loud to Sara on your behalf. If you have any questions for the event facilitators, you can also type them here. So to kick off today's event, we're going to give away a $40 gift certificate to the Top Shelf Preserves website. Thank you, Sara, for this generous donation. So all you have to do is open up the chat, and in a couple of seconds, we're going to give everyone a fun question to answer. We would like you all to answer the question by typing in the chat, but please wait to press send until we say so, because we're all going to send our answers at the same time. So the question is, what is your favorite way to enjoy dill pickles? So again, please wait until everyone has had a chance to type their answer until we send. The question again is, what is your favorite way to enjoy dill pickles? Give everyone a couple more seconds. And I'm going to count down from 3, and we'll all send our answers at the same time. So 3, 2, 1, send. Straight from the jar, that's my favorite too. Charcuterie board, a Cuban sandwich, sliced with cheddar cheese. There's such great comments in the chat, so thank you everyone for sharing your answers. We would now like to welcome Sara, who started Top Shelf Preserves in 2013 after a decade of cooking in professional kitchens. She created a line of bold pickles and preserves and soon realized she had a real knack for the craft. Her unique and delicious pickles and preserves fit the bill whenever you desire a handcrafted touch. Whether it's an elevated brunch, an inspired cocktail, a cheese or charcuterie board, or a late night snack right from the fridge, Top Shelf Preserves is proudly handmade in Ottawa. So Sara, it's over to you to announce the giveaway winner and to share your expertise on dill pickling tips and tricks.
Hey everyone. Hi Leanne, thanks for the introduction. And obviously all the answers are great, but obviously I'm gonna have to give it to Kyle Hansen with a big sandwich, because truly it's not a sandwich unless you have pickles. So good call, Kyle. And you will be the recipient of our $40 gift card for the website. So we'll chat with you afterwards and get you set up to browse our website. We've got over like 25 different kinds of pickles, preserves, jams, marmalades. So you can pick out what you'd like. Thanks for having me back. I'm excited to show you guys dill pickles, because it's one of those things that once you learn to make, it can save you a lot of money, and that you can really tailor them to your own taste. So that's one of the coolest things that I love about making my own preserves, is that I can make them how I want them. So if I like them to be spicy or really sour or salty, I can do it because it's fine. And so I do hope my goals today are to show you guys how to safely make water bath canned dill pickles. And then I also want to show you which things you can safely modify to your taste. So I'm not sure exactly where to start. Do you want to ask the poll questions, Leah?
Yes, absolutely. I'll launch it right now. So all attendees, you're going to see a poll pop up on your screen, and there's 4 questions in this one poll. So we'll let the poll go for a couple more seconds. Okay, and sharing the results.
Okay. Oh, great. You're all going to make pickles after this. I like to hear that. Okay. And so a lot of you, 6 of you, do not have a canner pot with a jar rack. So I'll be happy to show you some modifications you can do to like a stock pot that you might have in your house. And it looks like a lot of you have made pickles. So you've got some seasoned pros in the chat. All right. Well, this is a really cool feature. I like to see these poll results because it gives me an idea of where you guys are at. And throughout the session, I am happy to answer questions. Leanne will let me know if there's like a good moment for me to answer anything. So don't be shy to put that in there and she'll bring it up at the appropriate time. So like to start out with, I want to talk about some of the equipment, and I have a few different kinds of jars that I will show you guys. So I have this is a wide mouth mason jar, and this is a standard mouth mason jar. So you can see they're a bit different in size, and they do each require different sizes of lids. So this is what you're going to need unless you bought your jars new and they came with new lids. It is safe to reuse your jars many times, but it's not safe to reuse the inside snap lid. So these are these are called 2-piece snap lids, and it doesn't have to be Bernardin brand. There's other brands that you can use, and they're compatible with the different jars. So I have a Golden Harvest jar, I have a vintage mason jar, I have a couple Bernardin pint jars. So when you are making pickles, if you're going to use jars that have been used before, let me just stress it's really important that you use fresh ring. So sounds like a lot of you have made pickles, so I will kind of do a quick overview. Basically, what we're going to do today is we are going to prep some vegetables. We are going to pack them into the jars. This is the raw pack method. We're going to mix up a pickling liquid based on a recipe on the National Center for Home Food Preservation website, which Leanne will share with you guys. It's a really awesome resource for home canning, and it's free, and it has the most up-to-date scientifically tested recipes, so it's a great place to go find the most up-to-date information about safe canning. And then one thing I will say about using old vintage jars, you do kind of run the risk of them potentially breaking as jars are used in water bath canning like over and over. The integrity of the jar can break down. So if it's a jar that you're really attached to, maybe don't make your pickles in it for the water bathing because it could crack and then it would be broken. But usually you will have really good success dozens of times reusing them. Okay, so just moving forward, I would like to show you guys what I think is one of the most important parts of pickling, which is just selecting the correct produce and just treating it properly. So we want to put a lot of care and attention into the produce because there's really no point in preserving something that's not good to begin with. So basically we're going to wash the cucumbers, we're going to inspect them, make sure that they're not soft or have any blemishes that we don't want to, that are unacceptable to us. So I will just move over here. And then depending on what cucumbers you're able to get, your pickles are going to look different. So when I made, recently I made some dill pickles, and you can see they're like really cute, small dill pickles. We got these from a local farm called Foster Family Farm. So these we just packed whole into the jars, and they are technically baby dill pickles. These cucumbers that I got, you can see they're a bit different because they've been quartered. So these I made with some cucumbers that we got from Just Farms in Alexandria at the farmers market here in Ottawa. And I decided to slice them because they were kind of like fat cucumbers, and I thought this might be perfect for like sandwich slices. So you guys can do that as well. I do find that if you're going to slice the cucumbers, you may get a less crispy result, but they may be ready to eat quicker. With dill pickles, I like to leave them for 6 weeks because after they're pickled, they can be really sharp in flavor. It takes some time for the liquid to penetrate the cucumbers, and after a few weeks, what will happen is that flavor really mellow out and become really delicious. So just depending on what kind of cucumbers you're able to get, today I was able to get these sort of large, I would say these are like number 3 or XL pickling cucumbers. So these are great for doing dill pickles. They're nice and firm. They let me use them at the farmer's market. I went to the Parkdale market. We are kind of at the very end of the season because we've had a couple early frosts last week. So a lot of the local farmers are saying that'll be it for cucumbers. So if you guys are planning to do cucumbers, I advise you to get on that ASAP, as in like tonight or tomorrow, because part of what makes good dill pickles is having nice fresh cucumbers. So if you wait, you may not be able to find them. And this doesn't really work with other types of cucumbers. I've like Lebanese cucumbers, English cucumbers, field cucumbers. They just don't have the same quality as these pickling cucumbers. So if you can't get your hands on cucumbers, I will also run you through making a dill pickle version of pickled beans. And those are still pretty widely available. So for now, what I'm going to do is just show you, I'm going to wash the cucumbers. And it sounds really simple, and it is simple, but it requires a bit of care. So I'm just pouring some cool water onto these guys. And we're just gonna like agitate them in the water. And then what I want to show you is when a cucumber grows, this would be the stem end. You can see there was a stem there. And then on the other side is called the blossom end. So on the blossom end, this contains an enzyme that can make your pickles soft. And so when we wash the cucumbers, I like to make sure that we don't have any residue left from the blossom. Oops, sorry. That's upside down. Oh my gosh. How can it still?
If you have an iPhone, if you don't have the screen like locked in position, it might rotate with your camera.
Oh, that's totally what's happening. Thanks, Leanne. Oh my gosh. Alrighty. You guys are probably all seasoned vets with Zoom now, being back to school and work and stuff, but here in the kitchen where I don't have those skills honed in yet. All right, so as I was saying, on the blossom end of the cucumber, this end, you are just going to want to scrape off that blossom as best as you can. Or what you could do is simply to cut it off. So the recipe that we're looking at today recommends to just cut off the last 1/8 of an inch of cucumber. And I think that's fine, but I don't totally see it as necessary. It does take a little bit of extra work, certainly, to wash all the cucumbers by hand. And if you get small cucumbers, it's even more work because they're more knobbly and they have more creases and places where dirt and sand can get stuck. So for my opinion, to make good pickles, you should really plan to put a lot of work into making sure that they're clean. And if they're picked recently after a rainfall, they're probably going to be really dirty. But that's okay. That they're grown outside, so they taste really good. So anyway, I like to soak the cucumbers in water and then just kind of wipe them off. And then do it just depending on how dirty they are, you might want to do it again, or you can use, I have like a dedicated brush that I use to like get the dirt off. So I'll just wash a few of them here and then I'll show you what we're going to do. So for our pickles, that's the basic prep. We're just going to wash them. And then same thing with, let's say, I'll do some of these yellow beans. We just want to make sure they're clean. You don't want to put dirt in your pickles. It's gross. Don't do that. So for the beans, I also find if they've been sitting in your fridge for a couple days, I mean, obviously you really want to use the freshest produce you can, but let's be realistic. If they have been sitting around, you can soak them in cool water, which will kind of revive them a little bit. Their cell walls will perk right up. And of course, we want to wash them just to make sure they're nice and dirt-free.
While you're washing, Sarah, there is one question in the chat.
Okay.
Do you have any tips for pickling overripe produce, or do you avoid it altogether?
Well, personally, like I hate to throw food out. So I understand like the desire to want to save produce that you have that might be past its prime. But I do think it's so much work to do the pickle, to do any kind of pickling project, that I really do recommend trying to use really good quality produce. It's not going to be improved by being pickled if it's already not very fresh. But what you could do is do quick pickling to extend the life of it. So I can show you guys that as well. That's just pouring your hot pickling liquid over your vegetables in a jar, but not processing it. So it's not going to last on your shelf, but it can, if you get to it before your produce has deteriorated too much, it can extend the life a little bit. My recommendation is usually if you have a bunch of stuff that you need to use up, maybe make a soup or like try and make a big batch of something fresh, because it's really just not worth the effort sometimes. It's really disappointing to open up a jar, and especially if you've made like 50 jars or something and then they're not how you like them. So my advice really is to start small, and that's why I recommended maybe only 8 pounds of cucumbers for your first project, just so that as you learn, you can scale up once you have a recipe and a method that you're really confident with, and once you know your own capacities, how quickly you can get stuff done. I hope that answers your question.
Great, thank you, Sarah.
I'm just going to reach over and grab my garlic, which is just out of range, so I'll just be right back. Okay, so let's go over to that website. Let me see if I can share my screen here. So here we are on the National Center for Home Food Preservation website. This website is an American website, and we don't really have anything as up to date in Canada, so I do recommend that you check out this page. This is the front page. There's all kinds of interesting information: canning, freezing, drying. I basically taught myself to preserve from reading this website, so there's really no need to go buy a bunch of books. But if you are a book person, we've got some awesome preserving books available at the Ottawa Public Library, and some of them are also available as ebooks. So you can download the library e-reader app, and then you can request to borrow those books. But for today, let's take a look at this. So quick, fresh packed dill pickles. So their brine their pickling liquid is made with 2 gallons of water, 1 1/4 cups of salt, which is a lot, and typically there is a lot of salt in dill pickles. 1.5 quarts of vinegar, a quarter cup of sugar, 2 quarts of water. All right. So these have been, in this recipe, these cucumbers are soaked in salt water for 12 hours. Obviously, I did not do that. Sorry for that. This is not the typical recipe that I use. I did not want to give you guys access to my top shelf preserves recipes. And so actually when you brine the cucumbers like that, by dissolving salt in water and then leaving them for 12 hours, what will happen is those cucumbers will become easier to pack into the jars. They'll be a bit less fragile and less prone to break. Okay. So kind of embarrassing. Instead of using this recipe, I will just use a really classic recipe, which is a 2-to-1 of vinegar and water, or sorry, a 1-to-1 of vinegar and water. All right, let me just get reoriented here. I'm sorry, guys. So in the meantime, what you're gonna wanna do is get your garlic, your fresh dill. We've got some nice flowering dill. You guys can see this. It's beautiful, fresh flowering dill. So we'll use the flowers and the fronds. And then the other spices that I have would be, we've got mustard seed, dill seed, there's pickling spices if you like, and chili flakes. So lots of nice things to flavor your pickles. And that's one thing you can kind of play with, is you can change up the quantities of the different spices. Just give me 1 minute here. I'm gonna look up our knack dill pickles recipe because it's a really nice, simple recipe and I should have stuck with that. Okay, so the recipe that I want to use is from a book called The Knack, Canning, Pickling, and Preserving. And I'll show you a photo. So the recipe is from this book, which I've scaled up. And basically all you need is one, and this recipe is gonna be a bit better for us using metric. So it's 1 liter of vinegar, 1 liter of water, and half a cup of salt. And Leanne, if you don't mind to share that in the chat. So it's equal parts vinegar and water, 1 liter of each, and half a cup of salt. And I'm going to mix that up. So we'll get that going and then we'll prep our veggies and then we will begin prepping our jar. So I'm just using basic white vinegar. You want to make sure when you buy the vinegar that you see it has 5% acetic acid. There are some vinegars at the store that are 7%, and that's fine if you want to use that, but you'll need to make sure that the recipe you're using is that. So just make sure that you are using 5% acetic acid. That is the standard. If you're using a vinegar with less than 5% of acetic acid, then it's not going to be appropriate for doing water bath pickling, because the whole reason we want to add vinegar isn't just to flavor the pickles, but it's also to make them safe for water bath canning. So this brings me to kind of 101 water bath canning. You want to make sure that if you're going to preserve something in a water bath canner, that you do follow a recipe, and you want to make sure that the pH of your thing that you're canning is correct for water bath canning. So it has to be on the acidic scale, on the acidic side of pH. So that's why like certain vegetables and fruits don't require what we call acidification, because they're already acidic. So oranges and lemons and strawberries and raspberries, these already have enough acid that they can be safely water bath canned on their own. But for things like cucumbers, which aren't acidic, you're going to need to add vinegar. So that's how it's not okay. Basically, if you're going to be doing water bath canning, you absolutely have to be doing a recipe that is acidified. So if you make a soup for dinner and you have leftovers, you can't just put it in a water bath canner and it's safe to eat. That's not how it works. But it's really simple if you just follow a recipe. And then I'm going to be using pickling salt. So this is also called coarse salt. And the important part is just that you have a salt with no additives. We don't want to use iodized salt, because iodized salt will discolor your pickles. Got half a cup of salt that I'm adding to our brine. And I'm just going to go put this on the stove, and I'm going to turn on our water bath canner. Guys, thanks for bearing with me. I'm back. So now what I want to do is we'll prep some of the stuff that's going to go in our jars, and I will tell you about prepping your jars. So it's very important that your jars are immaculately clean, and you can achieve that simply by washing them in hot soapy water and rinsing them, letting them air dry, or by putting them through your dishwasher. And you can sterilize your jars, but as long as they're clean, it is safe to just use washed jars, as long as your processing time is at least 10 minutes. So once we have our jars all packed up with vegetables, we're going to pour the pickling liquid on top. We're going to put the lids on, and then we're going to lower them into the canning pot. And once the water in the canning pot comes to a boil with the jars of pickles inside, then we'll start a timer. So you can start a timer on your phone, or you can have a dedicated timer. But it's important not to start the timer until there's a rapid boil, so a boil that won't be stirred down. And then after that 10-minute timer goes, and that number will be different for different produce. So if you're doing pickled beets, for instance, that time will be increased to 30 minutes. If you're doing carrots, it'll be increased to 15. And then depending on the size of your jar, that will also change. So in the recipe that I showed you earlier, the National Center for Home Food Preservation page, I'll just share that screen again. There's a little chart at the bottom, and this is really important. So style of pack, raw, so that means that the items are going into the jar raw. The jar size, pint or quart, so a pint is 2 cups, a quart is 4. And then see how there's different times. So 10 minutes for pints and 15 minutes for quarts. So it's important that we follow these rules. And then if you are at an altitude above 1,000 feet, you have to increase your time. So that doesn't affect us here in Ottawa, but for anyone tuning in from elsewhere, it just has to do with air density. I'm not a scientist. I actually don't know the reason other than you just have to do it. And so then what you can do is, if you're like me, if you're going to process different jars at the same time, just make sure you use the biggest number. So we'll be canning pints and quarts at the same time. So I'll set my timer for 15 minutes. So I better get a move on here because we are just rolling through. Does anyone have any questions right now? I feel like I'm giving a lot of information because I'm trying to mix in the cooking with the canning process. And I know a lot of you have done canning before, so I don't want to belabor anything too much.
There is currently no new questions in the chat.
Well, if anything comes to you guys, just let me know. So I'm just gonna plow right ahead. I'm gonna wash these beautiful dill flowers. Try and give you a nice overhead view. I don't know if you can see these they're in like a pollen stage, so they're yellow flowers. These are the head of like a stalk of dill. We've got like a bucket over here. This is really bad resolution. And those we got from Foster Family Farm. But you can use dill flowers in any stage. So you can use them when they're green, you can use them when they're yellow, or you can use them when they are turning into seeds. So what will happen is all these little flowers will eventually become dill seeds. And what I like is to have a bit of both. So you taste all the different parts of the dill. So what I mean by that is you can totally get away with not having any of the fresh dill as long as you have the dill seeds. That's these guys. These are really essential to make your dill pickles taste like dill pickles. And so I don't even really use a recipe for the spices for dill pickles just because I've done them so many times. But I'll just show you what I would do. I would put in like a couple dill heads. I'll put in some of the dill fronds. And when it comes to the garlic, you can leave it whole, you can cut it up. I kind of like mine sliced or cut in half. You could crush it. You can put as much or as little as you like. And you don't have to put garlic in at all. I'm going to put a lot in this one. And then you're kind of basically just limited by the jar to how you're going to pack them. So this jar works really well for these size of cucumbers. And I'll try and show you. My kind of trick for packing is that I like to hold the jar on its side like so. I don't know if you guys can see. And then that way it makes it easier to get the pickles in kind of straight. Just because I think it's really important when you're pickling to fit as much vegetables in as possible so that your vegetable to pickling liquid ratio is around 50-50. You don't want just a cucumber floating around in a big jar because it's not going to have the right, it's not going to taste very pickly. It's going to taste more just straight vinegary. And then you can definitely get creative with the packing process. You certainly have to sometimes with the cookie vegetables that we get. So you could, for example, cut them to fit inside the jar. So you can kind of see I just put a little half cucumber on top just to make sure that the jar is nice and full. And like I said earlier, if you cut the pickles, they're not going to be quite as crisp as leaving them whole. But and then it's still an extra half little pickle. Okay, and then what you're going to want to do is add your spices. So I'm just going to I'm going to make mine really simple and just do dill seed and see how that turns out. Normally I also put in black pepper, or chili flakes or mustard seeds. So for this 1 liter jar, I'm going to put 1 teaspoon of dill seeds, which is 5 milliliters, or just put that in, and I'm going to put a couple extra little dill flowers tucked into the top. And I'm just going to wait for that brine to boil. So in the meantime, I will show you guys quickly to do yellow beans. So similarly, we'll get our, I'm going to use this jar because I'm worried about that vintage one breaking. So you're going to need to make sure that your produce fits in your jar. And you can kind of see, like, that's not going to fit. So we can cut them down, or you can get really creative with packing. And you can really pack them however you like. You can be swift about it, or you can be meticulous. I'm usually in the meticulous camp, but I feel like I have to get these done quickly today, so I'm just going to shove them right in. But you can see I'm using this kind of hold the jar in its side method, and this really works well because you can really get them nicely packed in there. And the convenient thing with the beans is that they'll be the same pickling time as the cucumbers. So we'll pickle them all for 10 minutes, but since we're also going to be pickling this large jar of cucumbers, we'll boost up the time to 15. Okay, and then for these beans, I think I'll do them nice and spicy and garlicky. But also delicious.
Sarah, there is a question in the chat about spicing and garlicking your pickled items. Should you follow the recipe closely, or is this kind of up to the taste preference?
Yeah, so the spices is really up to your preference, and that's one of the great things. Like, you could omit all the spices if you want it, just see what it would taste like. Or you can go crazy with adding lots of garlic and chilies. And you could try unorthodox spices as well. So that's always like a really fun thing. If you're making a bunch of jars, what I'll do for recipe testing is just try out, okay, this one has a half teaspoon of dill seed and 3 peppercorns. This one has like 10 peppercorns and a teaspoon of chilies, just to like have a control. So yeah, you can totally change that up. The other stuff that you can change in a recipe safely is type of vinegar. So if you're not a big fan of white vinegar, or you want to just try out some other flavors, you can absolutely do that. You just have to make sure that it's 5% acetic acid by volume. So you could use cider vinegar, or you could use champagne vinegar if you want to get really fancy. You could use white wine vinegar, red wine vinegar. It's really going to change the flavor quite dramatically because it's one of the only ingredients in them.
And can you safely use less garlic?
Absolutely. You could go no garlic. You could go half. You could make half the jar of garlic. It would be fine.
And the other question, you mentioned buying dill flowers at Foster Family Farm. Is there anywhere else local you recommend?
Yeah, so I went and just did a bit of reconnaissance this week because I was not sure with the season being like this if we'd still be able to get cucumbers. But they did have pickling cucumbers and fresh dill flowers at a couple of different farm boy locations that I visited. So I would definitely give them a call because they're pretty helpful if you just let them know what you're looking for. And the other place would probably be any other farmers markets. At Orleans Farmers Market and Lansdowne, I did see flowering dill last week. So that is totally possible to still get that. And the dill that I've had for a few weeks. I just keep it in a bucket of water in the fridge. So I know probably at home your fridges aren't quite as big as the big fridge I have here, but you can certainly extend the life of it if you just make sure to take out any side pieces still before they spread to the whole rest of it. I'm gonna just quickly take this over to the stove so I can show you guys what's happening over there, and you can see I've got my beans all packed in. I put some sideways on top just to kind of hold them all in. This is the shoulder of the jar, so they'll try and stay below this, and then that way they'll stay covered by the liquid. We don't want to pack them too full because then like we're gonna fill the brine up to here, about a quarter-inch from the top of the jar. So we want to make sure the vegetables are underneath. If they're sticking out, it's just not going to work very well. And I'm just going to unplug quickly so I can go over to the stove. Okay, guys. So I was just showing you over there the pickling brine, and I'm really sorry about my phone. I'm really just getting older and I don't understand all these things. Okay, back. So the pickle brine is ready to go. I'm just going to pour it into this measuring cup. You can use a pitcher, you can use anything with a spout. And if you don't have anything heat-proof or like glass, what you can do is use a ladle. So you can ladle right into the jars. I like to pour it. Just like so. We want to take our lids. And we're going to put the lids in hot water. So I just heated up pardon me. I just heated up our canning pot. So I'm going to spill some water in the canning pot. Heat up these lids. I'll be back. So the hot water is what gives these snap lids a seal. So you want to make sure that they're quite hot. Center this right on your jar, and then you want to tighten it what's called fingertip tight. So when you're holding it, just hold it with your thumb and your forefinger and twist it on firmly, but not too firmly. We don't want to crank it on because then that can break the actual seal. So here's one. Our beans, that was quick, really ready to go. Awesome. And then for our cucumbers. And so basically, if you don't want to do the canning process, or if you want to have what we call quick pickles, you could just do this, let them sit on the counter overnight until they're cool, and then just put them in your fridge. So this is, you know, a really great quick way to do it. It's kind of foolproof. And so now that our canner is nice and hot, it takes a while for the canning pot to heat up. So you want to make sure that your canning pot is hot at the same time as your brine is going into your jars, so they're not sitting around on your counter for too long. Then what you can do is, if you're just using a pot at home, you can modify. You could put like a clean rag in the bottom of the pot, and then you just take your jars and put them right into the pot on the rag. And the rag being in the pot makes it so that they won't bang against the bottom of the pot too dramatically while they're bubbling away. So if you've got like a stock pot at home, that's a really great method. Another thing that you can do is, if you've got a bunch of these lids kicking around, you can take these. This is really cool. And just tie them together to make a little something like so, which can go in the bottom of your pot, and then your jars can sit right on top of them. And then same thing, they'll be less likely to break on the bottom of your pot. I went to Preston Hardware just to see if they had canning supplies. They do. And I got a home canning kit just so I could show you guys. This is really super, super useful if you want to do any amount of canning. This thing right here, this is the jar, this is the lifter. Sorry, this is the rack, and this is the lifter. And so these are really awesome tools just to make sure you don't end up burning yourself. So I'm just going to take these and I'm going to put them in the canner, and I will be right back. All right, so this is... So I don't know if you guys could see, but the pot is not quite full. So I'm just going to fill it up with water to make sure that the jars are covered by 1 inch of water once they're lowered into the pot. So I'll be right back. Okay, guys, I got to tell you something. This pot is supposed to hold corn, so I'm going to show you so that you know. And we don't normally use home canning equipment, so it's kind of a blunder on my part. But let me show you so that you can see. All right, I am back. Another embarrassing blunder for my pickling class. It's a work in progress. Thank you guys for bearing with me. So in that pot, what I was trying to show you was that because the jar lid was above the max, like it could not be covered by water. That is not adequate for canning. So that we're not going to be able to can. And what I'll do is I'm just going to leave these as quick pickles. So I'm going to let them cool overnight, and then I'm going to put them in the fridge. The other thing you could do is just use a bigger pot. What you don't want to do, which can be really dangerous, is I've seen some people online doing this, putting the jar on its side in a pot. I really don't recommend it. Part of what happens in the canning process is that there's an air bubble inside this jar. And so once it goes in the canning pot, what happens is that the air bubble gets pushed out. And so when you go to pull this out, if it's on its side, what's going to happen is you're going to get a big air bubble coming out of boiling hot water right at your hands. So don't do that. I don't think that's safe. Yeah, so basically, you probably want to make sure that everything fits before you start. And make sure when you're getting your jars together that they're going to work with your canning pot. So this will fit in our big canning pot that we use here at work. We just use a really big stainless steel pot that's over in the corner. And that fits like something like 19 quarts at a time. So that's really what I'm used to using. Okay, so then the other thing I wanted to cover about the canning safety is about just making sure that that you set your timer as soon as it starts boiling. And because we don't have the large jar of pickles in there, we only have to can it for 10 minutes, which is the amount that you need to do for pickled beans or for dill pickles if they're in a pint-sized jar. So once that starts boiling, I'm going to set the timer, and it looks like they'll be coming out just as the class is ending. So I think at this time I will have to go over to questions and see if I can fill in any blanks that you guys might have from my lesson.
Thank you so much, Sarah. This has been great. The first question I have for you is, an attendee's read about leaving enough headspace or the right amount of air on top within the jar. How worried and concerned should they be about that?
Yeah, you definitely want to leave headspace. The amount that's indicated on the National Center for Home Food Preservation website is ½ an inch of headspace. And then that number will change based on what recipe you're doing. So if you're doing a marmalade or a jam, it may be 1/4 of an inch. And you can use a ruler to measure that. I was kind of just going real quick, so I didn't. But yeah, the headspace is important. You don't want a jar that's filled with air. The other thing that's important is if your items are really packed quite tightly inside a jar, there can be little air bubbles in the jar, and you want to make sure you're poking those out. Because once it comes out of the canner, all those bubbles will go up to the top, and then you might end up with, for example, instead of these pickles having liquid all the way up to the top, it might just come to here. So my canning pot is starting to boil. I can hear it bubbling away in the background. I don't know if you guys can see it. And I'm just going to start my 10-minute timer. And then because we'll be closing up just as that's finishing, I'll just explain once that finishes its 10 minutes, we're going to turn off the canner and take the lid off. And then we're going to set a 5-minute timer so that the jars have a moment to their temperature to settle down a bit before we shock them by taking them into our environment. So if you pull them out right as the 10-minute timer goes off, this can be very dangerous. You can burn yourself. And what can happen is that air bubble that's in the top can burst out and it can break the seal. So just really important, every recipe that you're doing, make sure after your 10 minutes or your 15 or whatever is indicated in the recipe that you do let it sit for 5 minutes afterwards before you pull them out. These guys, super handy. I always use them upside down for years until someone showed me it's actually easier to use them this way. And they really hold on nice and secure. These are like rubberized, so this is super useful. And if you don't have a canning pot, but you can get a pair of these, I really recommend it because then you don't need the rack to lift the jars in and out of the water.
Did you find that at Preston Hardware as well?
Yeah, and like I said, I went there this morning, and the staff did say that all the canning stuff's been selling like crazy. So if you want to do your projects, definitely call around, or you might need to hop to it because I've heard there are some shortages. But they did have loads of lids, so if you have vintage jars, they've got you covered for lids. They had loads of equipment. I bought that little canning pot there. It was $50 after tax. It comes with a little rack. Um, and they also sell like different pickling and preserving items there, like pressure canners and food drying stuff. So they're an awesome resource in Ottawa.
Great, thank you, Sarah. And the last question we have in the chat for you is an attendee wants to try your pickles, but your website says you're sold out. They're wondering when you're going to restock your website and if you can recommend any Ottawa retailers that they can go to in the meantime.
Yeah, pickles being sold out, that's been very real for me this season. It's been really different doing business this year for obvious reasons. That we're gonna have them really soon. I just spoke with my label company, and our labels are being shipped to us by the end of the month. So check our website October 1st, and I should have like lots of dill pickles up there. You might want to act quickly, and I'll make sure to post on our Instagram when they're back. In fact, I'll probably open it up for pre-orders next week just to make sure that folks that have been waiting can get their orders in.
Great, and there is actually one more question. An attendee's wondering if they can use an Instant Pot as a pressure canner.
That's a great question. So pressure canning is different than boiling water bath canning. Boiling water bath canning is just bringing water up to boiling point and putting the jars in for the amount of time with the lid on, like I've described. Pressure canning is a whole other thing, which you can definitely learn a lot about on that website I shared earlier. And I actually don't know the answer to that question, but I suspect that you may be able to do that since it is a pressure canner. The difference with a pressure canner or a pressure cooker in general is that it can bring the temperature up above the boiling point. And so when you bring the temperature above the boiling point, many items can be canned that you can't do in a water bath canner. For example, items that are not low acid, so they don't have to be acidified. So because the contents of the pressure cooker or the pressure canner are brought up to such a high temperature, they will kill any botulism that could be present. So those recipes are totally different. So definitely a really good question, and I will look into that because I'm very curious. And I have a little Instant Pot that I've used a little bit, but I haven't fully dived into yet.
Great, thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you for all the attendees who joined us today and asked questions. Before we conclude the event, we do have one last poll to launch today, so I'm going to launch it right now. And this one's just one question. And the question is, do you feel ready to make your own water bath canned pickles at home? We'll leave it open for a couple more seconds while everyone votes. Okay, I'm going to end the poll now and share the results. So
okay, good.
And if you don't feel confident yet, I know that Sarah is super active on her social media, and our events team member Michelle has posted the links in the chat, so you can connect with Sarah on social. You can do your own research. We'll reshare that link to that website that Sarah was showing us to be able to get those tips and feel ready. So thank you again, Sarah, for the informative presentation.
Thanks, guys. I hope this shows you that you really need to plan your time out really well when you're doing these projects.
Perfect. So on behalf of the AC Hub, we want to give all attendees a huge thank you. If you're interested in rewatching the recording from this event or other past events, we're going to post the link in the chat now, and this recording will be up before the end of the week. Our next AC Hub virtual event is Job and Career Readiness Workshop for International Students with the Employment Support Center. It's taking place tomorrow at 1 p.m. and details can be found on the Student Support Services website. The link will be posted in the chat now. So thank you again, everyone. We'll see you at our next virtual event.
Thanks, guys.